Let's take this discussion a notch further. President Muhammadu Buhari has presented a proposed 7.3 trillion naira budget, and that's about $24 billion to the National Assembly.
And some lawmakers say the 2.24 trillion naira earmarked for capital projects should be targeted at infrastructure, economic expansion, and job creation. And certainly, obviously, Nigerians have been waiting anxiously for the formal presentation of the 2017 budget by the president, and they hope it will indeed take the country out of recession as promised by the president.
Now, the 2016 budget of change, it's still very much a reference point at this time when key deliberations on the new budget are set to begin. But this morning, we will attempt to give out a clear understanding of how the 2016 budget has fared before we go into the content. Buhari has presented a proposed 7.3 trillion naira budget, and that's about $24 billion to the National Assembly.
And some lawmakers say the 2.24 trillion naira earmarked for capital projects should be targeted at infrastructure, economic expansion, and job creation. And certainly, obviously, Nigerians have been waiting anxiously for the formal presentation of the 2017 budget by the president, and they hope it will indeed take the country out of recession as promised by the president.
Now, the 2016 budget of change, it's still very much a reference point at this time when key deliberations on the new budget are set to begin. But this morning, we will attempt to give out a clear understanding of how the 2016 budget has fared before we go into the content of the 2017 budget presented to the lawmakers.
All right, let me take you to my wall for perspectives on this. And we have a financial analyst with us in the studio, Akin, Omisade, and he'll be joining me. We'll come together on the set.
Yes.
And we have Muda Yusuf, Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It's good to see you. Let me take Akin to my wall and then we come to this.
Okay.
All right. I used to think I was tall. Maybe you stand.
I'll stand here. No, I'll stand
I used to think I was tall, but having Akin with me on this year, I'm dwarfed really. Now let's get into this now. Okay. This administration adopted the zero-based budgeting system when it came into power in order for it to achieve socio-economic goals amidst dwindling oil revenues. Now, you might be wondering what zero-based budgeting means. Now, these are some of the projects, and certainly it's good to go around department, agencies, and the ministries of government, and that's how it's going to go. But Akin, let me ask you, first of all, when we talk about zero budgeting that this is predicated on, give us a simple analogy of what zero-based budgeting is.
Well, basically what it means is you're Ministry of Defense or Ministry of Agriculture. So we are starting out that you have zero. That means you've done your homework, you've done your research, you've made sure that all the T's have been crossed, all the I's have been dotted, and that we are starting, as I said, starting off with you don't have anything. You don't have any income coming in, you don't have any income, any residual income. So that is why it's zero. So you are starting on a clean slate, as it were. So basically that is what it means. So you don't have anything, but with the caveat that your projection, which is your budget, is based on clear-cut analysis, that all your screws have been bolted on properly. You see, no leakages, no excesses. So that is essentially, let's look at it as street man's language, zero base. I don't have anything, but I want to make money. These are my projections.
Okay. Zero-based budgeting is planning the budget process based on current needs and costs instead of existing ones, as in the case of traditional incremental budgeting system where you build up on what you already had before. That's what he said. Now, but putting it in a layman's term, zero-based budgeting requires ministries, departments, and agencies of government to justify all projects and show their relevance to government policies. And if this is done, the project gets zero budget. That's allocation. Let's look at the
zero budget, Mike, meaning they don't get anything.
They don't get anything.
Yes.
They don't get anything. The point is, let's start from the scratch. Let's start
we don't have
all
anything.
over. We don't have anything.
Let's start
Let's start off all afresh.
Haven't done our homework
exactly.
properly.
All right, let's get on to the benefits of this. Now, curbing wastages could be one of them, but you will explain better. We have Muda Yusuf with us there too. The issue of efficiency is there, and then to detect padding. You know, padding is part of is gradually becoming a term or a lexicon in our budgetary process now.
It's coming to our language in Nigeria.
And then we have the issue of prioritizing goals on that's infrastructure and then ensure implementation. Now, let me ask Mudashiru on some of this. We have this, let's say we have this theoretically right now. If you want to really pitch it in trying to be very specific, how much of this were achieved in the 2016 budget?
Well, I would say the issue of wastages. I think there was a lot about that, curbing wastages, and I mean we all heard of how much savings were made from goods workers, from all these things, biometric and so on. I think there was quite a lot about wastages, being curbed during the year. The issue of padding is neither here nor there. This is debatable because
that's the political side of the budget.
It's a political side of it. True. Because the Constitution says that the power of appropriation lies with the National Assembly. So whether the National Assembly can add to the budget or subtract is something that is debated. Okay. But the power of appropriation as what can be spent lies with the National Assembly. Okay. So what has brought about the controversy is that the National Assembly has increased some aspects of the budget, which is now being described as padding.
So would you say then that the 2016 budget, according to Buhari, actually says it builds, this 2017 budget will build on the 2016 budget. So is it a strong enough foundation for the 2017 budget to take off properly?
Of course, it's a continuum. It's like work in progress.
Yes.
It's still the same administration. So they have to follow from where they stopped. So I agree with him. It has to build on what they did last year. And in any case, because of the challenges of revenue, the shortfall in revenue, targets are not being met, shortfalls in oil output, all these things have affected the projections. So there are quite still a lot of gaps that needs to be filled.
Okay, I know yesterday Akin gave F9.
F9.
You gave F9 to the budget implementation of 2016.
And I'm wondering, after listening to the president yesterday, do you still stand on F9?
Well, I still do stand on F9.
Okay.
Because as Mr. Muda Yusuf said, it's a continuum. We are starting a budget based on 7 trillion. Small money compared to 110 trillion economy. So how are you going to reflate that? If you look at ask yourself, the world market reacted yesterday after the budget was read. I don't know whether you were aware. Oh. Now what they're saying is this is a budget that's actually confirming that we're not going to devalue. And if you're not going to devalue, because you pegged your naira to the dollar at 305, what that means is that foreign investors are not going to come in. If foreign investors are not going to come in, who's going to develop the power sector? Then we've based our budget again on oil. We're going to expect 50% revenue from oil. We're producing 2.2 million barrels per day. We have the problem with the Niger Delta. We have refineries that are not fully functional. So 2.2 million barrels per day is ambitious. Pegging it at 305 is ambitious. We're going to be borrowing excessively. Now, we're going to borrow over 2 trillion naira. Where are we going to get it from? We don't have the confidence to approach the World Bank, the IMF, and we're saying we have recovered loot. Now we're going to pay to get our monies back from Switzerland. The minister said we have over 500 billion to collect, but we're going to pay over 90 to get that back. So we're getting a balance back. Now, we're talking about internally generated revenue from corporate taxes, from VAT, from excise duties. Now, corporate taxes, you want to attract foreign investors and you want to jack up taxes? Okay. Now, that is something, so you begin to see that it's a recipe for failure already, what we're doing. Wow. Now, you've put in 500 billion into power, housing works. How does that work? To electrify Nigeria, to get us starting, we need over 100 billion. Where are we going to start that from? Convert that into dollars. Convert that into dollars. We have other sectors. We have gas that we are not even looking into. We're just talking about oil. The price today is $53, $54 to the barrel. Okay, we've been allowed to continue. What about if OPEC decides 3 months down the line that, okay, we've allowed you some time, reduce your production.
Reduce your production.
What do? We don't have a fail-safe procedure or system in the budget. So for me, it's still...
Okay, we'll come back to this. Let's move ahead to something else that Nigerians out there would want to know. Now, let's getting on. Now, President Buhari's 2016 budget is anchored in 6 pillars. Now, we have the economic reforms in there, we have the infrastructure, we have the social development, we have regional development, we have environment, we have security. Now, these are terms, I must say. If you put it in, these are just terms. Someone would say, well, what are the step-by-step mechanism or strategies to achieving this? Muda Yusuf didn't seem to give F9 to the budget like you did. Now, if we have to look at all of this, what are the strategies to actually get this? Or how much of this has been achieved in the 2016 budget so far?
Well, for economic reforms, we cannot say that much was achieved. Because one of the key challenges that the economy had in the current year around policies, around like interest rate policy, foreign exchange policy, trade policy, there were no major reforms in all those aspects of policy. There are no major reforms. One can say that, of course, in terms of ensuring that there is some discipline in spending, anti-corruption, quite a lot was done. But in terms of fundamental economic reforms, there were really no much.
If we even take the issue of infrastructure, because some analysts have said that if infrastructure is really built on, it would help expand the economy and therefore stimulate economic activity. But in the area of infrastructure, how much of that did you see?
Well, infrastructure, you see, because of the financial constraints that the government has, there is very little impact that can be made in the infrastructure space.
Okay.
Infrastructure deficit is so huge that at least last year, I mean, the current budget, this is 2016, we had, I think, about 2.4 trillion or so for the entire capital project. And this Fasholah's ministry, which is the main driver of infrastructure, had about 433 billion. It's a far cry from what we need to do in terms of infrastructure. So we need to be very clear. The government alone, through its finances, through the budgetary process, cannot fix infrastructure.
So without infrastructure in place, can Nigeria then become a manufacturing hub? Which is part of the projection?
We cannot. The point I'm making is that unless you have policies to attract private capital into infrastructure space, domestic private capital, foreign private capital, we are not likely to have a major impact on infrastructure.
Whoa.
Because the deficit is so huge that, especially at the time when you have dwindling resources.
Okay. Let's move on here. The issue of social development is another issue there. About 200,000 youth were employed under the N Power. Well, I understand they were supposed to start in December. I guess that's part of this being implemented is a program of about 500,000 youths as far as that is concerned. Let's move on now. Now, 40 road projects spread across the 6 geopolitical zones were meant to be dualized, as you can see in the graphics here. This is just a representation of the geopolitical zones in Nigeria. We have the northeast in here. This is the area where Boko Haram had been devastating. We have the northwest in there, and then we have the north central, we have the southwest where you have Lagos, and then we have the south-south zone, in that area, and then we have the southeast end. And we have roads that are supposed to crisscross the entire length and breadth of the country. We have federal roads, trunk A roads all over the place, and about 40 of them are supposed to be dualized. But whether they were actually dualized
is another
matter altogether. Now let's move on. Now, for the power sector, several projects were designed to optimize and deliver consistently 7,000 megawatts of power. In fact, a total of 460 billion naira was earmarked for projects in the power and housing ministry. Yet Nigerians still complain of epileptic power supply. So if we talk about this, I know we're going on break in just a few minutes from now, just about 2 minutes. Now, let's go into power, for instance. Akin, I'd like you to talk briefly on power before we go on. Okay. my producer said we have to go on break right now.
Yeah.
Stay with us on
right.
TVC Breakfast. Neo Yellow is standing by for the news update, and he's going to give us the news update now, and then we come back to dwell more on this. We still have with us Akin Omisade with us in the studio. He's standing with me here. I used to think I was tall, but he's a very tall man. And we have Muda Yusuf with us in the studio. He's the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We'll come back to this. Stay with us on TVC Breakfast.
All right, you're welcome back. You're watching TVC Breakfast, and we're taking a look at the budget, 2017 budget. Of course, our guest, Muda Yusuf, is the DG, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Akin Omisade is also a financial expert.
He's standing with me on my wall.
Standing with the mic on the wall. But maybe before I allow you to go back to the wall, let me take you up on this, Muda. I mean, you are the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Are you impressed with the fact that 15 billion naira is set aside, or will be set aside, to recapitalize the BOI, that's the Bank of Industry, and of course the Bank of Agriculture? Is that enough to turn that sector around?
Well, it may not be enough, but you know, they have other sources of funding. And they have also been running, very well for at least in the past few years. I know that the bulk of the CBN intervention funds are also channeled through the Bank of Industry, for instance.
Yes.
A lot of funds. They also manage the Dangote fund. They have all sorts of funds that are being managed by them. So I think this is just to complement the funds that they already have.
Of course, 92 billion naira too will be used for the agri sector.
Agri sector,
yes.
And there is another 1.3 billion US dollars that is being proposed under the proposed Development Bank of Nigeria. So there are quite a number of funds available out there. The challenge with funding is access to it.
Okay.
It's access. How do you access the funds? How many SMEs can meet the requirements to access the funds? That is where the main bottleneck is. We have quite a number of funds out there from the CBN, from all sorts of places. But how many people can access the funds? So that is the key thing. We need to break the key bottlenecks in accessing funding.
All right, we would like to know how to break those bottlenecks, but let's go back to Mike.
It's a big one, I must say. You know, before we went on break, we were analyzing issues on my wall, and we got to the power sector. And this is an area that Nigerians are very concerned. In fact, analysts have said that if we fix power,
we fixed everything.
We fix Nigeria, and then everything will take care of itself. Akin, I wonder if you believe in that. If you agree with that, that if power sector is fixed, Nigeria is fixed.
Well, to a large extent, I do agree with that.
Okay.
If you fix power, you fix a lot of things, because cost of running a factory will go down, cost of running your studios will go down, cost of running my business will go down. Not just the cost of running businesses will go down. This is an economy that does not work 24/7. Factories close at 5 p.m.
Yes.
If we have continuous power, we will produce better, we will generate better products, we will work 24 hours, government will realize more income from taxes, we will have more investors interested in our stable economy or stable environment. So yes, it does answer a lot of questions. It's not just having electricity in your homes or anything, but being able to generate products, goods. We will probably do more. And just like that, you know what will happen? There's a catalytic effect, because what will happen is we now have more products for our monies. And what will happen? Inflation begins to come down. Then we have varieties of products. We have varieties of services, you know.
Then the buy made in Nigeria will actually become a reality.
Well, now you're talking.
Well,
now you're addressing
the made in Nigeria dream is another issue altogether. About 460 billion naira was earmarked for power project in 2016 budget. We see that in the next budget, 2017 budget, it was barely about 500 billion naira. But let's move on here. Now, we see that of the 2.2 trillion naira deficit for the 2016 budget, 1.2 billion local borrowing is expected, and it's going to be sourced locally, while 635 billion naira will be borrowed from external sources. Now, the president added that the World Bank had provided a loan of $125 million to the federal government to procure vaccines and other ancillary facilities to stop polio, and also provided $450 million to assist in the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the Northeast. Now, in October this year, President Buhari wrote to the National Assembly seeking its approval of his administration's external borrowing plan of $29.96 billion. That's roughly about $30 billion for the execution of key programs and infrastructural projects across the country. Now, for how long will the borrowing streak continue is one thing. Let me ask Akin on this, because I know we're discussing yesterday, this issue also came up. Yeah. The issue of $30 billion, it hasn't been approved. They have gone back to the drawing board yet to see how they can come up with it, but I know they're still bent on that. How much will that do in complementing the 7 trillion 2017 budget if it comes up?
It wouldn't do much. Okay. It might attempt to reflate. I mean, we're looking at a 110 trillion economy, and you're bringing 30 billion. Wide gulf. But don't forget that the borrowing is not to close the gaps. It's to restart or to kickstart the economy. The question is, what are we going to put those 30 billion monies into? That's the only way, because if we get the 30 billion and it's put on recurring expenditure, and what do we have again? Further inflation. So, and that is why we need to know what it's going to be put into. If it's going to go into power sector, then I'm in agreement with the president.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Now, before we go, I'd like Muda Yusuf to react to this, but let's go on a break and then we come back on the program. Stay with us. All right, thanks for staying with us on TVC Breakfast. We are analyzing and breaking down the 2016 budget, also looking at 2017 budget as presented by the President Buhari at the National Assembly yesterday. And we have with me on my wall here, Akin Omisade. We have been looking at this. He's a financial analyst. And we also have in the studio Muda Yusuf, is the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Before we went on break, Muda, I was asking what your... First of all, let me make a correction on this. This is supposed to be 1.2 trillion naira. That's supposed to be part of local borrowing from domestic borrowing to fund 2.2 trillion naira. I said billion earlier on. Now, what's your reaction on the issue of borrowing, where the ability to borrow this to really make up the 2016 budget? From that window, has that been met in true terms?
Well, one of the key challenges we have in the economy today is the burden that domestic borrowing imposes on the economy. The debt service last year in 2016 was debt service provision was about 1.4 trillion. Almost 35% of revenue to service debts. In the current budget, 2017, is 1.66 trillion debt service. It's about 74% of capital budget and about 34% of revenue. You can see the burden that debt servicing is putting on the economy. So if you want to create a better fiscal space, we need to deal with the issue of the debt service. Because the burden on the economy, and the bulk of this is coming from domestic borrowing. So apart from the burden, there's the challenge of the challenges it creates in the financial market. If you have $1 billion naira as somebody who wants to invest, and you can go and buy treasury bills and get 18%, 20%. Why will you want to go into manufacturing?
So how do we then tackle the debt issue?
We have to reduce the costs at which the government is borrowing.
Okay.
The cost is too much. And it's even creating a financial intermediation problem in the financial system.
Okay.
Because all the funds that are coming to the system either go into federal government bonds or go into the purchase of treasury bills. That is not what we need to turn the economy around. So it's a major, it's a very fundamental issue.
So what are the critical aspects of this 2017 budget that you think government should be targeting seriously if this budget is going to deliver on its promise?
Well, you know, there are two components to the budget. There is the policy component. There is the appropriation component. The appropriation, just as our financial analyst has said, in terms of the numbers vis-a-vis the size of the economy, there isn't much that can, the impact cannot be that material. So we need to also moderate our expectations from the federal government budget. And in any case, we have the state governments, they also need to put something on the table as far as the economy is concerned. We have the local governments, they need to put something on the table. So we should not load everything
on the federal.
Okay.
If this budget is going to deliver on its promise?
Well, you know, there are two components to the budget. There is the policy component. There is the appropriation component. The appropriation, just as our financial analyst has said, in terms of the numbers vis-a-vis the size of the economy, there isn't much that can, the impact cannot be that material. So we need to also moderate our expectations from the federal government budget. And in any case, we have the state governments, they also need to put something on the table as far as the economy is concerned. We have the local governments, they need to put something on the table. So we should not load everything
on the federal.
Okay. I think we need to realize that.
Okay. All right, let's go back to this now. Going ahead, you know, Nigeria's 2016 deficit budget is the highest ever in the nation's history. Now, the federal government earmarked about 1.36 trillion naira for debt servicing in the 2016 budget. Now, on foreign debt, the federal government will spend 54.5 billion naira on foreign debt servicing as projected in the 2016 budget. Let's move on. Now, talking about income generation, recent reports say that the non-oil sector alone and custom duties was able to make more than 1 trillion naira. And that in fact, the Nigeria Customs Service in August said it generated and remitted to the federal government coffers more than 95.7 billion naira, the highest revenue in 10 years. How realistic are these figures? Now, Akin, let me ask you this. When it comes to the customs, from the reports we get, are doing a great job on you know, generating revenue for the government. Now, is that a good start to say, okay, let us take our attention from oil and go into the issue of remittances from customs and then from taxes and VAT and income and all of that?
The simple answer is yes. It is a good step, and it begins to make us more accountable, which is part of what you just mentioned. You mentioned whilst we were talking about zero-based budgeting, efficiency. This is what we begin to see. We begin to see such efficiencies, we begin to see such responsibilities for reporting. Now the spotlight is on customs, it's on excise and duties. It's on all of us because you pay it indirectly as well. So yes, it is a good way. It imposes on all of us, on the government, local businesses, even foreign businesses, the responsibilities to pay local taxes. So it is a good way. My own concern is how well are these reports? That's my concern.
How reliable are
How reliable are they? Do we have an agency that monitors these statistics? What was it last year? Was it really an improvement from last year to this year? What is the projection for next year?
All right, Muda, let me
see,
bring...
on this customs thing, you see, when we are in a recession and when the citizens are facing the kind of hardship that they face, especially from the point of view of the cost of living, we need to drive, we should not be too hard in our drive for revenue.
Okay.
Because the cost of things are so high now for two major reasons. First is the currency depreciation. Because whether we like it or not, we are still largely import dependent. Secondly is the import duty. Because there is already a depreciation in currency. If you maintain the duty at the same level, you are having a 100% increase in duty. Because what you are paying, if you import something worth $1 million, which used to be 150 million naira, Now the exchange rate is 305.
Yes.
It's 305 million naira. By the time you apply the same duty, the duty has doubled. So these are some of the sources of the pain that the citizens are suffering now. Okay. So if you want to ease the pressure, we should be looking at reducing some of this duty so that the citizens can have the disposable income.
What about expanding the tax bracket, getting more Nigerians to actually pay taxes? What kind of incentives do you think government should be giving to encourage that?
Well, the government is already giving concessions, waiving some penalties, encouraging people, doing a lot of campaign and things like that. That is already happening at the level of the FIRS and even at the state level with some state governments. But again, what is important is that in a recession, you need to ease the pressure on citizens.
Yeah.
Pressure on taxes. I'm not saying that people should not pay taxes. The efficiency needs to improve. But the rates we can begin to review. The rates also on import duty we should begin to review so that costs can come down. Because there's no point loading so much revenue to government when you have the citizens are, disposable income is collapsing, investment spending is also collapsing. So in order to rejig the economy, you need to also activate spending at the level of the investors and at the level of consumption.
And the president also talked about policy harmonization. Do you think a lack of it is actually at the root of some of the economic challenges that Nigeria is having today?
Yeah, it's a major problem. Harmonization between monetary policy
and fiscal policy
and trade policy. Yes. Each components of this were just moving in different directions. So the point that the president made about harmonization is a very important point. Okay. But we are yet to see the framework of how that will happen.
Okay. I'll allow Akin to go sit down now.
Okay.
Take the weight off your feet.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Or in fact, let's even go sit down, I must say.
Yes,
now,
indeed.
We'll be going into, I know that Muda Yusuf will be leaving soon because he has other appointments to meet up with, but we have to...
We'll be looking at the funding, how the 2017 budget will be funded. It is a very critical point that we must make this morning. But the Nigerian government is optimistic that the 2017 budget will not only take the country out of recession, but that it would also open gates for her prosperity.
But how does the government hope to finance this budget? That's one of the big questions in there. But the revenue target for the 2016 budget was pegged at 3.86 trillion naira. Now the federal government is targeting 10 trillion naira as revenue for the 2017 fiscal year. And that's like triple of what was projected in 2016.
Now, of this amount, about 5 trillion naira is expected to be generated from the sale of crude oil. And that's if the bombing of pipelines by Niger Delta militants does not hinder it. Non-oil revenue are expected to generate about 5.06 trillion naira. Of course, in 2016, that sector appeared to be a major revenue earner for the country. Financial analyst Johnson Chukwu reacted to this development. Let's listen to him.
Very optimistic, too optimistic. Price projection is relatively realistic. I mean, crude is doing about $55 today. Presently. So even in worst case scenario, and well, you never can predict it. We've done $27. But I believe with the decision of OPEC supported by Russia, if they stick to that decision to cut production by 1.3 million barrels without imposing the same cut on Nigeria, and we're able to address our local production, I believe that crude price should range around that $50. So the $42.5 projection for me is realistic. But the key thing is that we are not likely. For me, it would be an exceptional occurrence should we meet the fallen production. Because even if you stop the crisis in the Niger Delta, even if you reduce the insurgents, you are still going to take some time to restore those pipelines, those facilities to their production level.
So it will take a miracle to achieve 2.2 million barrels.
That's what I was just saying. It's optimistic, very optimistic.
Muda?
But Muda, what's your take on this? How optimistic are you when it comes to... Now, we know that OPEC and Russia and other world oil producers are trying to see how they can cut oil output so they can raise the price. But how would that favor Nigeria?
Of course, it will favor us. First, there is a revenue effect, because at least oil is still a major source of revenue, even as we speak. So it will impact positively on revenue. It will also impact positively on our reserves and foreign exchange, management. Because if you have a situation where you have this kind of very good prices in terms of oil, then the revenue, the reserves will also become more robust, and the capacity of the central bank to also support the foreign exchange market will also improve. So we are likely to see a moderation in the rate. Then there is also the investment effect. All the key investors in the oil and gas sector, they have been having challenges because of the collapse of oil price, in addition, of course, to the security challenges in the Niger Delta. So as oil prices improve, the economics of the business will also improve.
But that's on the ground. That's on the ground that everything remains equal and there's peace in the Niger Delta.
That is very critical.
But the place is volatile. You can't guarantee.
That is critical. But if you see in the budget, the president or the government has increased the amnesty votes to about 65 billion. It's a major jump. I'm hoping that will help to at least calm some of the challenges that we have.
Well, I guess earlier things is not just about throwing money at the problem, it's actually tackling the problem at the very root of it.
Well, it is part of it.
Yes, absolutely, but that's not even my question. Now that things seem to be looking up in terms of the price of crude oil, it's looking up and hopefully it continues. Are you concerned that we might just go to sleep again?
No. We have learned.
We have learned our lesson.
We have learned our lesson. We cannot afford to.
Well,
yes,
you are very optimistic. Okay. But do you know that we might not have as much oil in 30 years' time?
Yeah, those are the
Don't forget that the U.S. is actually getting ready to become the #1 major exporter of oil. Not only that, the major consumers of oil are also looking at shale. So what we think is the goose that is laying the golden egg as of today might still be alive, but its golden egg might not be relevant. So your projections about the prices going north, you need to temper it.
Okay.
If we have an oil glut again, what's going to happen? We'll force down the prices.
Again.
Back to square one.
Not only that, we're dealing with consumers. And these consumers are getting ready to say, listen, no, you can't hold us to ransom anymore.
Okay. All right. We are still discussing this. We'll go on a break and we come back to dwell more on this issue. We have with us Muda Yusuf and Akin Omisade with us in the studio. Stay with us on TVC Breakfast.